Well, while you take your seat, give a big hand to Scott Nelson. He's coming to challenge you. Okay, this guy is a genius. Okay.
Thank you, Ed. I'm actually the least interesting person in the room. But I appreciate the sentiment, Ed. My daughter gave me that phrase. She was living in Prague at the time, and she and her husband got invited to an embassy dinner. And she said, "Dad, do you know what it's like to be the least interesting person in the room?" It says, really, really, really fascinating. I'm around all these really amazing people. And I was, wow. All right, thank you. I'm around all these interesting people in the embassy dinner, and I realize I'm the least interesting person here, and yet I'm at the table. I'm at the table. My life has an interesting story to it. If you look at the right-hand side, this is an approximation of when I was trying to learn to read what I would see. I have 2 learning disabilities that make it very difficult for me to do something called sequencing, which you have to be able to do to actually form grammar, you have to be able to do to create sentences. And these learning disabilities don't make me see what's on the right. It's kind of an approximation of what I see. But I read from the outside of the page in. I have to actually get all of the information to comprehend anything. Now, in school, this was not a good thing. So if you are in school and you point out, hey, on the page, do you recognize that this word it repeats 4 times? Or some other pattern that you recognize, the teacher thinks you're basically making fun and just trying to create a joke, and so you get disciplined. And that was my experience. And what this experience taught me over time, because this experience went on into my career, is that I could not write and I could not communicate very well. Because when I tried to communicate, I would tell people about all the patterns I would see, and I didn't know that they couldn't see them, and I didn't know that many of the patterns I saw were meaningless. They were just correlations, they were not causations. When I was in my 20s, I got diagnosed for the disease that I have, and that helped me actually learn some coping skills and whatnot. But I carried that wounding in my life because my story to myself was I couldn't communicate and I couldn't write. God's story was different. God's story was, no, I'm going to have you write a book. He actually had a prophetess give me a prophecy, which was, you're going to write a book, and I laughed. I mean, I laughed uncontrollably, laughter, because I thought, boy, this person doesn't hear from God. What a ridiculous idea. Yet, I actually wrote a 650-page book, and I wrote it for first draft in 90 days. Now, that to me, you don't understand that to me, for me, was an impossibility. Because when I would try to write, sequencing was so hard for me that after 5 hours of trying to write, I would be literally incoherent. I could not actually communicate. I couldn't put sentences together. And my wife can testify to this. I would not be able to talk to her, which she would find very frustrating. And I would have to go to bed. Yet while I was writing this book, I had up to 15-hour days of nonstop writing in which I wrote 20 or 30 pages in some days. And I was so energized by the time I ended that I couldn't go to sleep because I understood that I was operating under the power of God. Israel had this same thing happen in their life. You see, they thought they were the most uninteresting people in the room too. They're in the desert, they want to go across the sea. They get across the sea. Joshua is going to take them into the land, send spies, and he says, they come back. We all know the report. 10 of them say, there's giants in the land. There's no way, this is impossible, we can't do this. But God's story was, no, there's milk and honey there. The promise I've given you is there. Trust me, not yourself. Follow my covenants and my ways, and I will give you the land. Africa has an incredible story. Some of you here are from Africa. Who's from Africa here? Can you raise your hands? All right. So please don't get offended at what I'm going to tell people about your continent, because it'll get better. Africa has the fastest growing urbanization population on Earth. It has 1.8 billion new people who are projected to be born there between now and 2050. It has 26% of the arable land, and less than 1% of the food is produced on that 26% of the land. It has the worst GDP created per natural resource dollar of any continent on Earth. It is a dark continent. If you look at it from space at night, there's no light because there's no power. There's huge, vast areas for which there is nothing. The church's legacy there isn't really great. It's not a great story. Sub-Saharan Africa is largely Christian, yet it has the highest perception of corruption index in the world. It is a place where the church has been completely ineffective and has failed the people. It has the largest population of poverty on Earth, and that population of poverty is projected to go up by 300 to 400% in the next 26 years. So how do we disciple nations? How do we create kingdom nations? Nations that actually operate under the laws of love, who have a culture that comes from heaven, and that actually produce redemption with those kinds of things. This looks like it's impossible, and we look like we're the least interesting people in the world, so how can we actually affect a nation? Well, the church's story of trying to create a nation is this. This is its self-talk in its head, just like my self-talk to myself was that I couldn't actually do something. I couldn't write, I couldn't communicate. It's too big an idea to create a virtual nation, yet that's what people believed was needed. It's too complicated to succeed. It requires too much. It costs too much. And yet nothing was working. Nothing was working. So now I want to give you a teaser of a report out from a group of people in Africa who said, we aren't going to believe our self-talk. We're not going to believe what we think is possible. We're going to believe what God thinks is possible. And this is after 3 years. I'm going to come back to that. Oh, what happened? How come it didn't play? Oh, can I get the video to play?
There are over 750 million people coming into Africa in the next 30 years that aren't going to have jobs. Productivity needs to address that. God has given us the answer to be able to unlock people into productivity.
Zambia 2023. We're having the most amazing forum. There's a real sense of unity and collaboration.
We have so much that God has given us. All we need is to come together, encourage one another. From here, something different, something strong is going to come up.
How to transform a society, you have to have the generational perspective.
We are going to be talking about raising the next generation, unleashing possibility.
The importance of media in our time right now cannot be underestimated, especially when it comes to stories of new economies, the story of productivity. Because when you tell a story, people want to be part of that.
Coming here at this forum, suddenly I see a people that are on fire for God, a people that are full of vision, a people that have a vision beyond just our ministries, beyond our churches, beyond our cities, beyond our nations. Talking about a continent and talking outside the continent. Only God could have pulled this out.
Every Fortune 500 company is drooling over Africa. They do not see these things as problems, they see these as opportunities. And until the church understands the opportunity here, it will not have an effective strategy. So a little over 3.5 years ago, the Up Movement, which is a group of business people, an ecclesia, started coming together to form what you've heard people talk about here, a techlesia, a virtual nation, a nation that actually has its own constitution, its own statutes, its own culture, its own economy. And this economy is actually funding schools, healthcare, soon providing telecommunication services, taking care of people, and the results are absolutely nothing anyone has ever seen. We had all of what I'm going to tell you has happened without one dime from a church, without one dime from a NGO or Christian ministry, without one dime from any donation of any kind. It's happened from business people who got out of the church, went into the community, and worked on productivity. And the results are so astounding that one of the largest funds in the world, its chairman, broke down crying, broke down weeping, because they had invested tens of billions of dollars to create these kinds of results and have never been able to create it because it took an ecclesia to create those results. There are, in 3.5 years, there are now 25,000 of people who were illiterate on average, had no ability to do math on average, who are now have gone from $50 a month of income for a family of 4.9 people to $400 a month. Okay, that's an 8-fold increase. 25,000, okay? There has been 21 multi-million-dollar businesses established. In direct GDP, this means just for the participants participating, the 25,000, have created an increase in these two countries, Zambia and Zimbabwe, of $250 million of GDP. Indirect GDP, if you include what that has done to those countries, because of additional turns in the country, $750 million is the minimum estimate by the countries themselves, and these are the poorest people on the planet. There are 500 children that have been educated with a revolutionary education program. But God's story is just beginning. As a result of the things that have been happening there, God has come back, and because of this fund, the chairman who saw what was going on, what he said to us is, this is messy, because believe me, when God moves in something like this, it's messy. This does not look like anything we ever get involved in, but I'm personally committed to giving you $500 million to see this scale. And with that $500 million, we've run the financial analyses on this. It's been vetted by their economist. Projection is $1.5 billion worth of new direct GDP and $3.8 billion of GDP. This is a 10% increase in GDP in these nations 4 years. And this is going to be done using the biblical economics that I describe in my book that will produce subsidies in the form of endowments. An endowment is something you get and you never have to get any money again because it keeps giving you money. That is going to give 334,000 children education who currently have no education. It's going to give 221,000 people who have no access to health care in an environment where the death rate of a newborn is 47%. It's going to give them access to health care, and 87,000 new entrepreneurs are going to be created. This isn't happening because of us. We are the least interesting people in the room. This is happening, it's certainly not happening because of me, nor is it happening because of a 650-page book. Don't hear that. This is happening because God is moving in a way that anyone who has been part of this is saying they've never seen anything like it. They've never seen anything like it, and it doesn't look like what we thought it would look like. Families are being restored. Do you know in Africa, when you're poor, the husband goes to a mine or goes into the city with the hope for a job and leaves the family at home? 70% of these businesses that are being started are started by women who have no husband around. But it becomes so successful because we teach them how to become productive. We teach them how to use videos on these devices, which they all have, to become productive. And we teach them the difference between following biblical systems and biblical ways, and we get them to do both. You see, I don't have enough time to explain this, but in Scripture, God basically tells you that you have to follow both biblical systems and ways to get his blessing. If you do not do both, you will not get blessing. And he promises destruction or loss, and the loss of your family being the most significant one, to evil ways if you do not do both. Frank has an amazing story. He's just one of the people here. There are now, of that 25,000, there are over 1,000 that have actually completed the training program, this 3.5-year-long training program. And Frank has moved from $50 a month to $600 a month of income. Remember, the average for the 25,000 is already $400. He now owns part of a turnkey business that's $1 million business. And what he's doing is he's been taught how to use chickens to lay eggs that are then being sold to markets. We now have 120,000 farmers who are in this process. This box right here is a school. That box is a school. It comes with 32 tablets, a server, Wi-Fi. It has all the course curriculum necessary to teach the kids a biblical education. There are 500 kids that we use to prototype this with. We have some of the most inventive people in technology and education on earth working on this stuff. And under a tree without a teacher, these kids, after 1 year, having never gone to school before, are testing at 10% above the average for people that go to schools in that country. 2 hours a day, 4 days a week, and the kids are teaching the parents how to improve their productivity using the tools that are on the tablets so that they can actually produce more out of what they already have in their hand. There are now 3 agricultural hubs with 250 students in them, at an average cost of $350 a year per student, in a 2-year training program to teach mentors who basically can help people create and grow, act as consultants in these businesses. All of this is being entirely subsidized, not one dime of donation, entirely subsidized by business activity. Because when you increase productivity by 8 times, you can give anybody any kind of financial return they would ever want. But we do not want to give bloody Babylon what it wants to take, because they'll take it all. And we want to put that back into the system so that we can prove that we can do this not for just 25,000, not just for 120,000, but we have now 2 million who are in networks that have expressed an interest to enter the programs. 2 million. Can I get this video to play?
70% of Africa lives in rural areas, and so if you want to uplift and move people from a low-income sector or absolute poverty into middle income and in the cash economy, you need to focus in on agric.
You see, Africa has the lowest production of GDP of any continent on Earth. Less than 40% of the population has literacy, and yet it is growing at a rate that between now and 2050 is projected to include 1.8 billion new citizens. Africa has unbelievable problems that it's going to face, but I want to show you the opportunity. Well, in Africa, there is today the beginning of a new virtual nation, an ecclesia ecosystem that actually takes a career, a family, or a business out of Babylon systems and puts them in kingdom systems.
With this sort of ecosystem movement, we generally see a 10 times increase in a person's earnings.
My name is Frank Munkombwe. I have 1 wife, 6 children. Before I joined this project, I had some more problems. My family, they have to go to school. I have to buy some clothes, and also I have to eat. So I had a lot of problems. We started working with a company. I used my own money to build this chicken house. After 3 months, I received my money. And when I received money, it was good. It's when I started working and me also to build a house, and our church started buying some cows. Up to this time, every month I receive money. And I can tell you, my life and the whole family has changed.
So for somebody like Frank, in his sort of space, it moved him from an income of $50 a month or less to well over $600 a month. And within 1 year of us starting with Frank, there were 54 people around him that adopted the model and developed on it. And so that's a 54 times increase in 52 weeks. We built value chains that have about 120,000 farmers in them. And those are fairly big value chains. But 120,000 farmers in a country like Zimbabwe is a blip on the screen of Africa's reformation and change that's coming.
When you can get people working together and they can grow things like poultry or fish or cattle, in aggregate, we quickly reach institutional volumes. If it's done in the context of clubs and communities and people working together versus doing it independently and trying to plug in, it's massively better.
As a small-scale farmer, collaborating with other farmers, I can participate in corporate value chains and get my stuff sold in supermarkets or even in export markets. Oh, nice! I want in.
Working particularly in agricultural systems, we've seen how much having a farmer grow in their productivity helps their children get an education.
The tech ability within the ecosystem, as you start to watch those things come together, you realize that this is exponential.
We could be looking at hundreds of millions of farmers, hundreds of millions of students by the year 20
30. That's beyond what we had ever imagined, beyond what we could anticipate. And quite frankly, from an investor perspective, it gives us an immeasurable amount of additional risk abatement.
Now, we don't only have ecosystems in agriculture in Africa, but there are ecosystems that are forming other places as well. There are ecosystems in the development of cities, construction and property development.
And we're not just optimistic, we're scared optimistic. So we need people, we need experts, we need folks being educated to be able to manage what we know is going to be a viral event.
So how do you disciple a nation? You create a virtual nation with its own laws, its own culture, its own economics, its own systems to basically handle education, poverty alleviation, teaching of productivity, and you get the church out of the building into people's lives. This is a practical model of Techlesia. This is a practical model creating ecosystems of ecclesias, who then are equipped with turnkey models for creating business activity that teach people in 3 to 5 minute videos on cell phones how to basically improve the productivity of what they do in their existing job using what they already have in their hand. You see, Africa is not the poorest planet, not the poorest continent on the planet. Africa is the most undervalued continent on the planet. Its people are not poor and incapable of actually helping themselves. They need skills, they need systems that are purpose fit to what their problems that they face. Do you know that we now have what's happening in Africa is so viral that things are growing at 400% a year. We have more people coming in than we have the capacity to handle. And it is messy, let me tell you. It is duct tape, baling wire. I mean, it is held together like, you know, can you keep this plane in the air? Because it is growing so fast because one beggar is telling another beggar where to find food. And that food is changing valleys. And all you have to do is drive through these valleys. If you go to a valley where this isn't happening yet, you drive through it, all you will see is once in a while a man sitting on his haunches by the side of a dusty road. You go to another valley where this is happening, everyone's in motion. No one's sitting. You see brand new houses being built. You know that Frank's 54 people that were brought in, the 52 times increase in productivity, because do you know who those people were? His neighbors and his family line. His whole family line. Because when he did it, they said, I want me some of that. Let's do what Frank did. Look at what's happened to him. Frank and his 54 have built 3 churches with their own money, without a dime of donation from anyone from the United States. They've raised up and selected 3 pastors on their own, including Frank, who's been turned into a pastor. He's illiterate, by the way. He didn't go to seminary. Praise God. So anyway, let me end. A virtual nation is just the church being the church, discipling the place that it's in. And the beginning of this week at the conference, I had to take my son into a drug rehab on Tuesday. He checked himself out on Wednesday. I spent all day Monday and most of the day Tuesday just trying to get him into a program. And let me tell you, the system is broken, and every single person I talked to in the system said the system was broken, because there is no possibility of my son having been able to actually navigate the system, the bureaucracy that we've created to try to have people get help. And I talked to the people, I met some incredible people of God in that process. And they all said, the system's broken. Let me tell you what we can do. We can build the roads. We can create the sewers. We can build the airports. We can build the hospitals. We can build the drug rehab and the places that take care of people, and we can run them better than the government can run them, better than the NGOs can run them, better than anyone else can run them, because we have the Spirit of the living God inside of us, and we have His Word, and if we follow His systems and His ways, nothing is impossible, because the most interesting person in the room is the Lord Jesus Christ, and through His Holy Spirit, He can bring any solution, anywhere, anytime, by you saying, I want one of the giants.